Chapter 7 The Psychology of the Dream Processes. So far, we have discussed the dream wish. We have traced it back to the sphere of the UCS and have analyzed its relation to the day residues, which in the turn may be either wishes or psychic impulses of any other kind, or simply recent impressions. We have thus found room for the claims that can be made for the dream forming significance of our waking mental activity in all its multifarious. It might even prove possible to explain, on the basis of our train of thought, those extreme cases in which the dream, continued work of the day, brings to happy issue an unsolved problem of waking life. We merely lack a suitable example to analyze. In order to uncover the infertile or repressed source of wishes, the tapping of which has so successfully reinforced the efforts of the preconscious activity. But we are not a step nearer to answering the question, why is it that the unconscious can furnish in sleep nothing more than the motive power for a wish fulfillment? So far, we have discussed the dream wish. We have traced it back to the sphere of the UCS and have analyzed its relation to the day residues, which in their turn may be either wishes or psychic impulses of any other kind, or simply recent impressions. We have thus found room for the claims that can be made for the dream-forming significance of our waking mental activity in its all multifarious. It might even prove possible to explain, on the basis of our train of thought, those extreme cases in which the dream, continued work of the day, brings to happy issue an unsolved problem of waking life. We merely lack a suitable example to analyze, in order to uncover the infertile or repressed source of wishes, the tapping of which has so successfully reinforced the efforts of the preconscious activities. But we are not a step near to answering the question, why is it that the unconscious can furnish in sleeping nothing more than the motive power for wish fulfillment? We do not doubt that this apparatus, too, has only arrived at its present perfection by a long process of evolution. Let us attempt to restore it as it existed in an early stage of capacity. From postulates to be confirmed in other ways, we know that at first the apparatus strove to keep itself as free from stimulation as possible, and therefore in its early structure adopted the arrangement of reflex apparatus which enable it promptly to discharge by the motor parts and any sensory excitation reaching it from without. But this simple function was disturbed by the exigencies of life, to which the apparatus owes the impetus toward further development. The exigencies of life first confronted it in the form of the great physical needs. The excitation aroused by the inner need seeks an outlet in motility, which we may describe as internal change or expression of the emotions. The hurried child cries or struggles helplessly, but its situation remains unchanged, for the excitation proceeding from the inner need has not the character of a momentary impact, but of a continuing pressure. A charge can occur only if, in some way, in the case of the child, by external assistance, there is an experience of satisfaction which puts an end to the internal examination. An essential constituent of this experience is the experience of a certain perfect of food in our example, the memory image of which is henceforth associated with the memory trace of the excitation arising from the need. Thanks to the established connection, there results at the next occurrence of this need a psychic impulse which seeks to revive the memory image of the former percept and to revoke the former percept itself. That is, it actually seeks to re-establish the situation of the first satisfaction. Such an impulse is what we call wish. The reappearance of the perception constitutes the wish fulfillment, and the full cathexis of the perception by the exaction spring from the need constitutes the shortest path to the wish fulfillment. We may assume a primitive state of the psychic apparatus in which this path is actually followed, i.e., in which the wish ends in hallucination. This first psychic activity, therefore, aims at an identity of perception, that is, at a repetition of that perception which is connected with the satisfaction of the need. We do not doubt that this apparatus, too, has only arrived at its present perfection by a long process of evolution. Let us attempt to restore it as it existed in an earlier stage of capacity. From postulates to be confirmed in other days, we know that at first the apparatus strove to keep itself as free from stimulation as possible, and therefore, in its early structure, adopted the arrangement of relaxed apparatus, which enabled it promptly to discharge by the motor paths any sensory excitation reaching it from without. But this simple function was disturbed by the exigencies of life, to which the apparatus owes the impetus towards further development. The exigencies of life first confronted it in the form of the great physical needs. The excitation aroused by the inner need seeks an outlet in mortality, which we may describe as internal change or expression of the emotion. The hungry child cries or struggles helplessly, but its situation remains unchanged, for the excitation proceeding from the inner need has not the character of the momentary impact, but of continuing pressure. A charge can occur only if, in some way, in the case of the child by external assistance, there is an experience of satisfaction which puts an end to the internal excitation. An essential constituent of this experience is the appearance of a certain percept of food in our example, the memory image of which is henceforth associated with the memory trace of the excitation arising from the need. Thanks to the established connection, there results at the next occurrence of this need a psychic impulse which seeks to revive the memory image of the former percept and to revoke the former percept itself. That is, it actually seeks to re-establish the situation of the first satisfaction. Such impulses is what we call a wish. The reappearance of the perception constitutes the wish fulfillment, and the full exist of the perception by the excitation spring from the need constitute the shortest path to the wish fulfillment. We may assume a primitive state of the psychic apparatus in which this path is actually followed, i.e., in which the wish ends in hallucination. The first psychic activity, therefore, aims at an identity of perception, that is, at a repetition of that perception which connected with the satisfaction of the need. The primitive mental activity must have been modified by better practical experience into a secondary and more appropriate activity. The establishment of identity of perception by the short regressive path within the apparatus does not produce the same result in another respect as follows upon cathesis of the same perception coming from without. The satisfaction does not occur and the need continues. In order to make the internal cathesis equivalent to the external one, the former would have to be continuously sustained, just as actually happens in the hallucinatory psychologist and in hunger fantasies, which exhaust their performance in maintaining their hold on the object desire. In order to attain to more appropriate use of psychic energy, it becomes necessary to suspend the full regression so that it does not proceed beyond the memory image and thence can seek other paths, leading ultimately to the production of the desired identity from the side of the outer world. This inhibition as well as the subsequent deflection of the examination becomes the task of a second system, which controls voluntary motility, i.e., a system whose activity first leads on to the use of motility of purpose remembered in advance. But all this complicated mental activity, which works its way from the memory image to the production of identity of perception via the outer world, merely represents a rebound way to wish fulfillment made necessary by experience. Thinking is indeed nothing but a substitute for the hallucinatory wish, and if the dream is called a wish fulfillment, this becomes something self-evident, since nothing but a wish can impel our psychic apparatus to activity. The dream which fulfills its wishes by following the short regressive path has thereby simply preserved for us a specimen of the primary method of operation of the psychic apparatus, which has been abandoned as inappropriate. What once prevailed in the waking state when our psychic life was still young and inefficient seems to have been banished into our nocturnal nocturnal life nocturnal nocturnal life, just as we still find in the nursery those discarded primitive weapons of adult humanity, the bow and arrow. Dreaming is a fragment of the superseded psychic life of the child. In the psychosis, these modes of operation of the psychic apparatus, which are normally suppressed in the waking state, reassert themselves and thereupon betray their inability to satisfy our demands in the outer world. This primitive mental activity must have been modified by better practical experience into secondary and more appropriate activity. The establishment of identity of perception by the short regressive path within the apparatus does not produce the same result in another respect as follows upon cathetics of the same perception coming from without. The satisfaction does not occur, and the need continues in order to make the internal cathetics equivalent to the external one. The former would have to be consciously sustained, just as actually happens in the hallucinatory psychosis. Psychosis and in hunger fantasies, which exhaust their performance in maintaining their hold on the object of desire. In order to attain to more appropriate use of psychic energy, it becomes necessary to suspend for regression so that it does not proceed beyond the memory image and thence can seek other paths leading ultimate to the productive of the desired identity from the side of the outer world. This inhibition, as well as the subsequent deflection of the excitation, becomes the task of a second system, which controls voluntary motility, i.e., a system whose activity first leads on to the use of motility for purpose remembered in advance. But all this complicated mental activity, which works its way from the memory image to the production of identity of perception via the outer world, merely represents a rebounded about way to wish fulfillment made necessary by experience. Thinking is needed nothing but a substitute for the hallucinatory wish, and if the dream is called a wish fulfillment, this becomes something self-evident, since nothing but a wish can impel our psychic apparatus to activity. The dream, which fulfills its wishes by following the short regressive path, has thereby simply preserved for us a specimen of the primary method of operation of the psychic apparatus, which has been abandoned as inappropriate. What once prevailed in the waking state, when our psychic life was still young and inefficient, seems to have been banished into our nocturnal life, just as we still found in the nursery those discarded primitive weapons of adult humanity, the bow and arrow. Dreaming is a fragment of the superseded psychic life of the child. In the psychosis, those modes of operation of the psychic apparatus, which are normally suppressed in the waking state, reassert themselves and thereupon betray their inability to satisfy our demand in the outer world. The unconscious wish impulses evidently strive to assert themselves even during the day. The fact of transference as well as the psychosis tells us that they endeavor to enforce their way through the preconscious system to consciousness and command of motility. Thus, in the censorship between UCS and PCS, which the dream focuses us to assume, we must recognize the respect, the guardian of our psychic health. The unconscious wish impulses evidently strive to assert themselves even during the day, and the fact of transference as well as psychosis tells us that they endeavor to force their way through the preconscious system to consciousness and the command of motility. Thus, in the censorship between UCS and PCS, which the dream forces us to assume, we must recognize and respect the guardian of our psychic health.
The psychology of the dream processes. So far, we have discussed the dream wish. We have traced it back to the sphere of the UCS and have analyzed its relation to the day residues, which in their turn may be either wishes or psychic impulses of any other kind, or simply recent impressions. We have thus found room for the claims that can be made for the dream-forming significance of our waking mental activity in all its multifariousness. It might even prove possible to explain, on the basis of our train of thought,
possible to explain on the basis of a train of thought
those extreme cases in which the dream, continuing the work of the day, brings to a happy issue an unsolved problem of waking life. We merely lack a suitable example to analyze in order to uncover the infantile or repressed source of wishes, the tapping of which has so successfully reinforced the efforts of the preconscious activity. But we are not a step nearer to answering the question, why is it that the unconscious can furnish in sleep nothing more than the motive power for a wish fulfillment? We do not doubt that this apparatus too has only arrived at its present perfection by a long process of evolution. Let us attempt to restore it as it existed in an earlier stage of capacity. From postulates to be confirmed in other ways, we know that at first the apparatus strove to keep itself as free from stimulation as possible, and therefore, in its early structure, adopted the arrangement of a reflex apparatus, which enabled it promptly to discharge by the motor paths any sensory excitation reaching it from without. But this simple function was disturbed by the exigencies of life, to which the apparatus owes the impetus toward further development. The exigencies of life first confronted it in the form of the great physical needs. The excitation aroused by the inner need seeks an outlet in motility, which we may describe as internal change or expression of the emotions. The hungry child cries or struggles helplessly, but its situation remains unchanged, for the excitation proceeding from the inner need has not the character of a momentary impact, but of a continuing pressure. Continuing pressure. Change can occur only if in some way, in the case of the child by external assistance, there is an experience of satisfaction, which puts an end to the internal excitation. An essential constituent of this experience is the appearance of a certain percept of food in our example, the memory image of which is henceforth associated with the memory trace of the excitation arising from the need. Thanks to the established connection, there results at the next occurrence of this need a psychic impulse which seeks to revive the memory image of the former percept and to re-evoke the former percept itself. That is, it actually seeks to re-establish the situation of the first satisfaction. Such an impulse is what we call a wish. The reappearance of the perception constitutes the wish fulfillment, and the full cathexis of the perception, by the excitation springing from the need, constitutes the
excitations spring from the need,
shortest
constant,
path to the wish
path to
fulfillment.
wish fulfillment.
We may assume a primitive state of the psychic apparatus in which this path is actually followed, i.e., in which the wish ends in hallucination. This first psychic activity therefore aims at an identity of perception, that is, at a repetition of that perception which is connected with the satisfaction of the need. This primitive mental activity must have been modified by bitter practical experience into a secondary and more appropriate activity. The establishment of identity of perception by the short progressive path within the apparatus does not produce the same result in another respect as follows upon cathexis of the same perception coming from without. The satisfaction does not occur.
The satisfaction does not occur, and the need continues.
In order to make the internal cathexis equivalent to the external one, the former would have to be continuously sustained, just as actually happens in the hallucinatory psychoses and in hunger fantasies, which exhaust their performance in maintaining their hold on the object desire. In order to attain to more appropriate use of the psychic energy, it becomes necessary to suspend the full regression, so that it does not proceed beyond the memory image, and thence can seek other paths, leading ultimately to the production of the desired identity from the side of the outer world. This inhibition, as well as the subsequent deflection of the excitation, becomes the task of a second system, which controls voluntary motility, i.e., a system whose activity first leads on to the use of motility for purposes remembered in advance. But all this complicated mental activity, which works its way from the memory image to the production of identity of perception via the outer world, merely represents a roundabout way to wish fulfillment made necessary by experience. Thinking is indeed nothing but a substitute for the hallucinatory wish. And if the dream is called a wish fulfillment, this becomes something self-evident, since nothing but a wish can impel our psychic apparatus to activity. The dream, which fulfills its wishes by following the short progressive path, has thereby simply preserved for us a specimen of the primary method of operation of the psychic apparatus, which has been abandoned as inappropriate. What once prevailed in the waking state, when our psychic life was still young and inefficient, seems to have been banished into our nocturnal life, just as we still find in the nursery those discarded primitive weapons of adult humanity, the bow and arrow. Dreaming is a fragment of the superseded psychic life of the child. In the psychoses, those modes of operation of the psychic apparatus which are normally suppressed in the waking state reassert themselves.
In the waking state, reassert themselves, and
thereupon betray their inability to satisfy our demands in the outer world. The unconscious wish impulses evidently strive to assert themselves even during the day, and the fact of transference, as well as the psychoses, tells us that they endeavor to force their way through the pre-conscious system to consciousness and the command of motility. Thus, in the censorship between UCS and PCS, which the dream forces us to assume, we must recognize and respect the guardian of our psychic health.